In this demo, the focus is going to be on how to make a connection from an on-premises management station into the AWS cloud so that you can manage a deployed MySQL database. So the first thing we'll do is examine the configuration of our RDS database environment for MySQL, and then we'll make the connection using MySQL Workbench. MySQL Workbench is a free open source tool that you can choose to download. I've actually already got it installed and running on my on-premises computer. Think of it as a GUI database management tool for MySQL. So if I switch over to the AWS Management Console, I can then go into RDS Relational Database Service and check out what I've got running. If I click the Databases view on the left, and I'm in the North Virginia, US East-1 region, always pay attention to the region. I do have a database here. It's called Database-1. It's a MySQL Community Edition database. I also have a reference here for the database sizing, the underlying horsepower. The status is available. Not very much CPU utilization, 0 connections. Okay, there's not really much going on with that particular database. Well, when you deploy databases in the cloud using RDS, it's a managed service. Platform as a service, really. You don't have to manually provision the underlying virtual machines. You don't have to install database engine software. It's done for you. But you need a way to connect to it to manage it so you can actually start working with data. So I'm going to click on the database identifier to open up the properties of it. I'm interested under connectivity and security in taking note of, well, specifically copying the DNS database endpoint there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that to my Windows clipboard. Notice the default listening port is standard for MySQL. It's 3306. That's TCP. So if I fire up the MySQL Workbench tool on my on-premises computer, this is what I get. So I can then click the Add button next to MySQL Connections. I can name the connection. Maybe I'll call it MySQL in AWS. For the host name, I'm going to paste in that connection endpoint that I copied from the console. Port is 3306, standard for MySQL. Username is not root. In this case, it's admin. I can actually store the password in a vault here. It's managed by the MySQL Workbench tool, and that's it. Well, that's it at least for specifying those items. Next thing we can do is click the Test Connection button. And hopefully it'll come back and say it successfully made the MySQL connection. If it didn't, it could be a firewall issue. TCP port 3306 might not be allowed. It might be blocked. Or you might not have public connectivity available on your database instance. You can check that back here in the console when you're under Connectivity and Security for your database. Over on the right, down under Public Accessibility, it's set to yes. I set that when I deployed this to allow connections over the internet, which is what we're doing now. If that's not set, you can click Modify and make many different changes to the configuration of your database instance. Back in MySQL Workbench on premises, I'm going to click OK. So I've now got my stored connection, which I've named MySQL in AWS. Pretty slick. If I click on it, it's going to make the connection into the AWS cloud to my database instance. And that's it, we are in. If I click server status on the left, I get some details about the server status, like the specific version that we are running. If I click users and privileges on the left, this is standard MySQL config stuff, where we could add MySQL specific accounts. There's the admin account that we actually signed in with. I can go to data import and restore to bring data into MySQL. Now this is all administration. If I click schemas, I can view some database schema details, and I can go down into tables, where I could even right-click on table and choose create table, and from there start defining my table definition and its columns. Same thing goes for views, stored procedures, and custom functions. Of course, you can also use the toolbar buttons at the top, such as to create a new table, or to create a new view, or to create a stored procedure, whatever the case is within the database that it is that you need. Back here in my databases view, if I click refresh, notice that we have some connections now. Even though I'm only one user, it will make a couple of extra connections in the background when I'm using specific tools like MySQL Workbench. So we've now been successfully able to connect into our MySQL RDS deployed instance from an on-premises management station.